Prayer to St. Joseph for family and finances. Maybe today your home is quiet on the outside but noisy on the inside. The clock marks the hours, the kettle breathes in the kitchen, papers settle on the table, and the heart tries, in its own way, to find a place to rest. I see you. I recognize the weight of sustaining a family when the bills feel bigger than your strength and when the future, instead of a horizon, looks like a wall. It isn't weakness to feel tired. It isn't guilt to feel lost. It's human. Here no one points a finger. Here we sit at the table together. We breathe and we ask for light. Breathe a little slower now. Release your shoulders. Let your jaw rest. Feel your feet touching the floor. When the breath grows calmer, the body sends a message of safety inside, like turning on a lamp in a dark hallway. Science calls this regulating the nervous system. Faith recognizes that in this space of silence, the soul learns to listen again. The amygdala, that part of the brain that fires alarms and fears, begins to lower the volume, and the cortex, where serene decisions live, gains more voice. It's simple, concrete, sacred. By breathing with intention, you give your heart a chance to pray with clarity. And it's in this place that we find Joseph. He doesn't arrive with long speeches. He arrives with the sound of a plane straightening wood, with the smell of sawdust in the air, with a gaze that knows how to wait. St. Joseph, a man of silence and faithful work, guarded the Holy Family and taught through small gestures how to trust. Patron of the church and of workers, he shows us that divine providence isn't noise or spectacle. It is firmness born in hidden places, care that reveals itself at the right time. Joseph is the one who takes the plumb line, checks the line, bears the weight, and without complaint, keeps the house standing. Maybe your budget is misaligned like a board that has warped over time. Maybe you carry guilt, broken promises, impulsive purchases, old fears. I won't romanticize difficulty because it hurts, but I also won't feed despair because it blinds. The truth, spoken with tenderness, is that prayer doesn't replace responsibility. It illuminates responsibility. Prayer puts us back on axis so that, with small and steady steps, life can find its rhythm again. With St. Joseph, the spreadsheet becomes care. The adjustment of debts becomes justice, and generosity, even small, opens slivers of opportunity where there was only haste. Imagine the carpenter's bench. Morning light enters through the window and traces a light gold over the tools. There are nails, a hammer, a handsaw, sandpaper, glue. Each has its time, its gesture, its sound. The family's financial life, much like that bench, asks for order and patience. There are bills that need trimming, decisions that ask for the plumb line of God's will, and relationships that need the glue of charity so they don't break under fear. While the sandpaper works, it seems to hurt, but it's the very friction that removes splinters and prevents new cuts. Thus, with Joseph, we realize that providence does not ignore matter. It passes through it, like a master who knows the grain of each wood. Maybe your body has been on alert for weeks, sleeping poorly with a tight stomach, arguing over details that didn't matter before. That's the alarm system trying to protect you. Emotional neuroscience reminds us that naming what we feel helps reorganize the inner house. When we say, "I'm afraid there won't be enough," I feel alone, I feel pressured, something rearranges inside, and the mind can plan with more clarity. Give your emotions a name and then present them to God. When the heart tells the truth, grace finds open doors, and when grace enters, it doesn't humiliate, it empowers. There is a phrase that, spoken slowly, changes the climate of the soul. St. Joseph, silent guardian, intercede for us. Repeat it for a few moments like someone setting the day's tempo. As you repeat it, see the faces of those you love. See the bills too, not as monsters, but as papers that ask for a destination, a date, a decision. Money is a tool, not an identity. It doesn't measure worth, it measures transactions. Family comes before the balance, and the balance, when cared for with wisdom and justice, serves the family. In the school of St. Joseph, we learn to trust divine providence without losing our footing, without abandoning the responsibility that is ours, without outsourcing our choices. I don't promise shortcuts or instant results, because faith isn't magic. It's a way. What I do proclaim with respect and firmness is that God does not leave us orphaned, and that Joseph, a just man, knows how to open silent paths across difficult ground. Today, we will walk calmly. We will unite spirituality and practice, interior life and schedule, prayer and budget. Do not demand perfection of yourself. Seek direction. Do not blame yourself for the past. Take the next decision. One step, then another. One bill, then another. One honest conversation, then another. Love gives meaning where fear sees only numbers. Prepare your space. If you can, keep a pen and paper nearby, perhaps even that bill that has been robbing your peace. Let us offer this beginning to God with humility. 1 minute of silence, breathing as if opening the windows of the soul, and asking Joseph to help us listen, choose, and act. Then we will move into 5 lights that will touch the pain, reveal overlooked paths, break expectations that imprison us, and point to concrete gestures for the weak. Stay here. Let the workshop of Nazareth teach your heart to recognize God's voice in small things. Before we move on, say a brief prayer with me. Lord, receive this home, these bills, these names. Teach us, with St. Joseph, to unite silence and courage, prudence and trust. Give us wisdom to set in order what is due, and charity to protect what is sacred. Amen. Now, with the heart a little quieter and the body more present, we continue. The workshop is open. The light has entered through the window, and Joseph's hand points to the plumb line. Let us go forward together, step by step. Sometimes an argument begins over a small bill and ends in a silence that fills every room like a cold wind that snuffs out the lights within. It isn't just about numbers, it's about fear, about a sense of abandonment, about that mute question that returns every night. What if tomorrow there isn't enough? When the heart lives in alert mode, the whole house enters a defensive state. Bodies harden, speech turns sharp, a glass out of place becomes provocation, and dinner loses its flavor. This does not mean a lack of love. It means the nervous system, trained to protect, is pulling the family into a narrow hallway where everything seems urgent and threatening, and where it's easy to confuse care with control. I see you in that hallway, and with respect I name this pain so it loses some of its power. There is a hidden logic in financial anxiety that is worth understanding, not to justify wounds but to remove the thorns. When uncertainty lingers, the brain seeks safety anywhere. It looks for in the bank statement what the heart needed to find in connection. It demands predictability from the other when the world outside seems unpredictable. The result is a tired choreography. Someone charges, someone goes quiet, someone promises, someone gives up, and the home turns into a small courtroom. Emotional neuroscience shows us that the body stores the memory of tensions. That's why a tone of voice that once wounded starts triggering alarms, and the next conversation is already tense before it even begins. It isn't one person's fault, it's a cycle, and cycles can be understood and little by little transformed. In this scenario, St. Joseph draws near without a sound, and the image he offers is simple and demanding. The workbench, where each tool has its function, where the project needs more patience than force, where measurements aren't decided by shouting, but by listening to the material. In Nazareth, providence wasn't spectacle, it was perseverance. It wasn't nervous improvisation, it was daily fidelity. The just Joseph didn't rush the wood. He upheld the stages, respected the timing, trusted that God moves through the concrete stuff of life. Faced with the anxiety that splits a home, Joseph's presence reminds us there is a plumb line higher than our impulse to control, and that a structure only stands when the foundation is deeper than the weight it carries. There are couples who, without realizing it, turn the spreadsheet into a battlefield when it could be just a map. There are children who hide in their rooms to avoid breathing the heavy air of the living room. There are adults who grow old inside, trying to be a wall for everyone, and end up only building walls. The house then learns to speak in codes. Doors slam. Heavy footsteps mark defensive rhythms. Eyes look away as if seeking a makeshift truce. The heart, however, knows it wasn't born for a trench. It longs for a shared table, bread broken, a word that begins again. When anxiety takes the center, money becomes a ruler of dignity, and love becomes indebted. And this inversion hurts because it wounds the truth of the family. People come before papers, bonds are wider than bills, and dignity isn't measured by the balance, but by care. Pain also lives in the body. Insomnia that stretches the night, a stomach that burns, breath that shortens, shoulder aches, as if life had to fit only there. These are signs that the organism is trying to carry alone what should be shared. In recognizing these signs, without shame and without dramatizing, something quiet happens. The named emotion loses violence, and a possible conversation begins to be born. The fear of not managing is common. The fear of disappointing those we love is too. Behind many conflicts, there is a good desire that lost its language. When that desire finds its voice again, the desire to protect, to be just, to contribute, to belong, the home rediscovers a place for tenderness, and the pressure eases a little, just enough to see the next possible step. There may be piled up stories, promises made in haste, purchases that tried to make up for absences, months of improvisation that charged interest in affection. It isn't simple or quick to mend what cracked, but it is true to say that fractures can become sturdy scars when brought into the light. Providence does not erase the past with an eraser. It writes a new line from it, and if Joseph accompanies, that line is usually discreet and faithful, without spotlights, but with peace. When the household grants itself a bit of honest silence, the kind that doesn't punish or shame but simply recognizes, space arises for the home to cease being a courtroom and return to being a workshop. And workshops don't have judges, they have artisans learning from the material and from time. The care here is not to turn anxiety into identity. Feeling anxiety doesn't make anyone an anxious person by essence. It makes someone a heart on defense, a tired heart. The difference changes how we see one another, because if the other is not the problem becomes something before both of us, not between us. It's in this subtle shift that new conversations are born. We don't need to look for culprits. We need to look for support. Joseph, master of the hidden, teaches this gentle support, almost invisible, that doesn't show up in photographs but holds the roof through the rain. There is finally a truth that calms. Every family passes through seasons, and no season lasts forever. Anxiety makes it seem like an endless winter, but faith, even small, guards embers of spring. When fear says nothing will change, the memory of God's faithfulness replies that many things have already changed, and others can yet ripen. The workshop of Nazareth doesn't promise fantasies, it promises company. And with company, the night isn't as dark, the bill isn't as heavy, the road isn't as lonely. With St. Joseph at your side, the house hears a familiar sound again, the patient tempo of someone checking the plumb line, sanding splinters, fitting joints, and little by little what was cracked begins to find support. At the back of the house, where the world's noise barely arrives, providence moves like groundwater, silent, persistent, faithful. Nazareth was like this. There was no stage, no applause. There was a boy growing, a mother keeping things in her heart, a just father checking measurements, aligning boards, sustaining routine with trained hands. The little known here isn't an exotic idea. It's a way God acts that almost goes unnoticed, because it doesn't shout, dramatize, or flaunt. Wood that seemed ordinary took shape in Joseph's hands, and life that seemed ordinary was being protected by paths that would later prove necessary. Bread on the table, safe travel, the return home. Providence isn't a trick, it's presence. It is striking how tradition speaks of Joseph, patron of the church, intercessor of workers, silent guardian of the Holy Family. His greatness dwells in the hidden. There are no long sermons, but there are firm decisions. There is no fame, but there is obedience. There is no noisy promise, but there is fidelity that puts the shoulder under the load and carries it. In that hiddenness, concrete needs were not denied. They were embraced and traversed with dignity. The carpenter's craft sustained the household not only with wages, but with meaning. Each assembled piece repeated in the body, a simple creed: God is here. In the daily life that demands presence, there is a discrete link between this spirituality and the way our heart and brain work when uncertainty grows. The mind seeks patterns, longs to predict, asks for signs of safety. When it doesn't find them, it triggers alarms that take over the body. Yet even without flashy signs, small markers of care are enough to pull the nervous system back from the edge. A gesture of kindness, a word that restores belonging, a detail that reorganizes the day. Emotional neuroscience describes this adjustment as a return to what is safe. Faith recognizes in that return a thread of providence. What seemed like nothing is already something when it calms the body and returns clarity. And clarity in times of strain is worth gold. In the hiddenness of Nazareth, Joseph learned the time for the plumb line, the time for the nail, the time for the sandpaper. There was no point forcing the wood before knowing the grain. There was no point rushing the joint before preparing the faces. This respect for the material, far from a cold technique, reveals a spirituality of the concrete. Reality asks for listening, for reading, for patience. None of this cancels the suffering of those counting coins. It simply refuses the rush that breaks, preferring the tempo of someone who knows the weight of things. When life disorganizes, Joseph's quiet way teaches a wisdom that doesn't show up in immediacy. There are processes that, to bear fruit, must mature on the inside, without fanfare. Many family stories carry traces of this discreet providence. A contact that appears just when courage was lacking, a renegotiation that seemed impossible and suddenly finds room, a temporary job that opens the door to something more solid. Common language calls it luck, but the heart notices when there's a coincidence with the tone of care. These signs don't justify triumphalism, nor guarantee everlasting calm. They simply remind us that we are not abandoned, even when appearances suggest absence. The hidden doesn't mean empty. The hidden is the place where grace prepares the way. Some imagine providence means the absence of effort. Joseph's experience suggests otherwise. Providence offers support so that effort finds direction. That's why, in the midst of pressure, A quiet serenity sometimes arises that has no numerical explanation. It doesn't deny the bill, but it keeps the bill from defining dignity. This serenity isn't escape, it's discreet firmness, inner ground. When it appears, the whole body notices. Breath steadies, shoulders stop warring, speech finds cadence. What changed on the outside? Almost nothing. What changed on the inside? Enough to distinguish the essential from the urgent. In the hidden, grace sets the measures. In the hidden, hope learns to endure. In the hidden, fear loses volume. In the hidden, love remembers its task: to protect, to unite, to sustain. Repeating this isn't empty insistence. It's reminding the heart that God doesn't need spotlights to act. If there was night in Nazareth, there was morning too. If there was scarcity, there was also a table set. Providence has the rhythm of fidelity, and fidelity, translated into small gestures, remains when tempers swing. Thus, the home crosses the narrow corridor of uncertainty, and little by little finds a courtyard filled with light. This is the little-known thing, not an exclusive secret, but a way of seeing that restores meaning to the everyday. In recognizing God's discreet action in the simple fabric of days, the family sees itself sustained again, not by thunderous promises, but by a love that prefers the backstage and constancy. And under this light, what seemed only delay reveals itself as time of preparation. What seemed only loss reveals itself as pruning. What seemed only silence reveals itself as fertile waiting. In the hiddenness of Nazareth, providence keeps working. Many people learned, without noticing, to separate what is spiritual from what is practical, as if faith were one room and the spreadsheet another. But when prayer truly happens, it doesn't run from matter, it clarifies it. It's not escape, it's focus, it's not an excuse, it's direction. The surprise is here. Instead of erasing the numbers, prayer shines light on them, returning scale, priority, truth. The heart, once seized by alarm, begins to see differences haste-hid, the difference between what is necessary and what is noise, between what is possible today and what is a fantasy that drains energy. Faith, touching the everyday, doesn't infantilize, it matures. Neuroscientifically, when the mind leaves constant threat mode and finds a bit of safety, areas linked to planning and decision-making gain ground. The body signals there is room to think, and thinking ceases to be a minefield. In that inner climate, many families discover themselves more able to calmly name priorities: housing that protects, food that sustains, transportation that truly matters, commitments that express justice. No performative heroics, just progressive clarity. Prayer then appears as a state of presence that inaugurates choices that are more whole, less reactive, more faithful to what is essential. Some are startled to realize that in the school of St.Joseph, spiritual instruments and work tools share the same bench: plumb line and discernment, square and truth, sandpaper and humility. The workshop teaches, without fuss, that each stage calls for its tool and each tool has its time. Syncing the heart to that rhythm transforms the relationship with money. When providence meets a heart disposed to truth, decisions once postponed begin to take shape. The superfluous loses its shine, what is just finds its voice, and bonds regain centrality. The most radical shift of this broken expectation may lie in how the value of things changes place. In times of fear, everything tends to be measured by cost. When prayer reorganizes from within, cost and meaning start to talk to each other again. A simple coffee shared at day's end can be worth more for the household's health than any impulsive purchase trying to buy silence. A repair agreement, even if slow, can be worth more for dignity than a flashy solution that leaves scars. The budget then ceases to be a judge and becomes a map. And maps don't punish, they guide. Generosity, often misunderstood, enters this conversation without naivete. It doesn't ignore bills, doesn't romanticize scarcity, doesn't confuse itself with imprudence. Even so, when it meets measure and opportunity, it opens unexpected spaces in the soul and, at times, in concrete life. The brain, when it recognizes acts of meaning and belonging, responds with marks that sustain motivation and constancy. That's why small gestures, when born of a pacified heart, not only relieve another, but also strengthen from within the one who offers. And this inner strength echoes in perseverance, creativity, and courage to face necessary adjustments. Under Joseph's gaze, the relationship with time also changes. The immediacy that demanded magical solutions loses intensity, and patience, not passive resignation but active presence, finds its place. Good wood doesn't warp when the artisan respects the grain. Bills and agreements likewise ripen when each step finds its moment. Prayer doesn't speed up the clock. It aligns the heart to a truer rhythm, and aligned, the heart can endure the process without breaking inside. In the end, the greatest surprise of this broken expectation is simple. Prayer organizes. It organizes within, and by organizing within, reorganizes without. What was chaos gains a name. What was fear gains measure. What was accusation becomes gentle responsibility. The household breathes differently when it recognizes this truth, because numbers cease to be monsters and return to being signals. And signals, when read with serenity, point the way. Joseph, with his discreet presence, remains in the workshop checking the plumb line, and at his side a trust grows that makes no fuss, yet holds the roof as the day dawns. When the soul finds firmer ground, life begins to ask for simple forms that sustain what the heart recognized. It isn't a checklist, isn't a rigid method. It's a tempo that returns cadence to daily life. In Joseph's workshop, changes happen in the concrete, through discreet gestures repeated until they become a good habit. The rule is small, almost invisible, but it carries the weight of a foundation because it aligns inside and out, like someone checking the plumb line and repositioning the piece until the structure stops creaking. Then a first movement arises with the delicacy of a beginning. 7 minutes of silence that neither runs from the bills nor pushes the subject aside. 7 minutes fit into the gap between the kettle and the coffee, between the bed and the street, between coming home and turning out the light. In that short space, each name finds a place, each concern finds a voice, each paper on the table ceases to be a threat and returns to being paper. The body notices this interval and gives thanks. Breath lengthens, the nape releases, the mind returns to telling apart what is noise and what is real need. In the language of faith, this silence opens the door for God to pass through the house. In the brain's language, it turns down the alarm and returns the capacity to choose. A second movement also appears, smelling of order and tenderness. Order in the home. In many houses, a small drawer, a simple box, a modest folder receives the name St.Joseph's and keeps their intentions, bills, weekly goals, reminders of important dates. Nothing grand, just a clear place where what weighs heaviest is visible without crushing anyone. The symbol has a real effect. When what worries you gains an address, the mind stops scanning for danger in every corner. The home regains the sense that there is a north, a sequence, a beginning, middle, and end. The gesture communicates a silent message to the heart. There is care, there is company, there are processes underway, and that message sustains calmer conversations. A third movement, as old as Nazareth, involves each day's craft. Work, whatever it may be, ceases to be mere survival and returns to being a place of meaning. The first task of the day, however small, can carry a name within, can hold an intention, can begin as a quiet offering. There are those who, in this same spirit, follow a brief novena, 9 days, 9 minutes, like someone marking time with discreet fidelity. There are those who find, on Wednesdays, the tempo of St. Joseph's Rosary, which stretches across the week like a bridge of peace. The effect isn't magic, it's concrete. Constancy generates inner stability, and inner stability illuminates external decisions. In these three movements there is no promise of spectacle, there is soul craftsmanship. The first movement, with its 7 minutes, returns presence. The second, with its small dedicated space, returns order. The third, with its daily offering and ancient prayers, returns meaning. Presence, order, and meaning. Three pillars that speak to body and spirit, that calm anxious vigilance and strengthen realistic hope, that care for relationships so numbers don't devour affection. Repeating them doesn't become a burden when they arise from a place of truth. They become rails for difficult days and quiet celebration for wider days. This little rule learns from Joseph's wood. It doesn't ask for brute force, it asks for precision. It doesn't demand haste, it demands continuity. It doesn't depend on the day's mood, it depends on the decision to love what is essential. When the household finds this tempo, money loses the gray color of fear and returns to being a tool, and tools don't command, they serve. The home becomes less a courtroom and more a workshop, less a narrow hallway and more a courtyard with light. Without fanfare, what was misaligned begins to fit, and with the fitting, dignity breathes. At bottom, this practical consequence is a translation of what providence does in the hidden: sustain, guide, mature. Each time silence holds the names, the drawer keeps the papers with hope. The day's work is offered, a message crosses the home. God is here, in the simple. And from the inside out, what looked like permanent disorder reveals itself as a path under construction, a path that doesn't dispense with responsibility but illumines it, and that doesn't promise ease but offers company. Joseph, silent and steady, keeps checking the plumb line, and as the morning light grows over the bench, the family discovers the work is not alone, and the structure at last holds. Each bill is a piece of wood, Virtues are the tools. The plumb line is God's will. The glue is charity. The sandpaper is patience. The silence is the interval between blows. With Joseph, God adjusts the project of the home. Solid, simple, durable. The bench is set as on a Nazareth morning. Light enters at an angle, revealing golden dust in the air, and the wood grain appears like a secret map. Every piece has its veins, its knots, its history of winter and sun. Some accept the cut at once, others ask for stillness, others still need moisture and time. A family's life holds the same variety. There are decisions that settle quickly, wounds that call for maturation, dreams that need the right season. The artisan who lives in Joseph doesn't fight the material, he reads the material. The project then isn't imposed, it's revealed. When the plumb line drops, a truth becomes concrete. It isn't human will that defines the line. Gravity shows it. And in the language of the heart, it is God who aligns the vertical of our choices. A piece may look straight to the naked eye, but the plumb line doesn't negotiate, and grace doesn't cheat either. In times of fear, the temptation is to twist the gaze so the piece looks good. Under the gentle light of the plumb line, the bend appears without humiliation, simply as what it is. The body reads this honesty as relief. Tension in the shoulders eases. Breath finds cadence. The mind stops inventing narratives to prop up what won't stand, and relieved, sees with more clarity again. There are woods that need glue before the nail. Charity has this role of joining what cracked without violence, of filling small gaps that, if ignored, would grow into fractures. Glue is discreet, and for a time, you need to hold it firmly until it sets. Bonds also need this quiet support while trust heals. There is no spectacle in this, only care. Haste usually yanks apart pieces that were still setting. Charity supports until the union is strong from within. Sandpaper, in turn, has the reputation of hurting first and caressing later. The rough sound startles, and a hasty glance concludes it ruins, yet it's precisely what removes splinters and makes touch possible. In everyday life, patience does this invisible work. It repeats conversations that might seem redundant, revisits what seemed already resolved, allows small concessions that prevent bigger cuts. The brain learns from this gentle repetition and ceases to trigger alarms at every friction. The home gives thanks because affection fits again, where before there was only caution. Between one blow and another, there is an interval that never shows up in photos but sustains everything. Silence is that interval. In it, the hand regains precision, the ear finds its rhythm, the eye reviews the line. Such silence doesn't punish, it protects. It isn't ice, it's breath. The workshop that respects the interval gets more right than wrong because strength returns to the right place and intention finds its direction again. In the school of St. Joseph, silence isn't the lack of a word, it's where the word is born true. There is also the right joint, that meeting between pieces that recognize each other. Forcing creates tension, and later, a break. Patient fitting allows the weight to distribute without creaks. In a family, justice fulfills this function of measure, not as cold legalism, but as balance that keeps one from bearing everything while another is drained. When justice meets charity, the joint is smooth. The budget at such times ceases to creak, and the bond again bears weight without apologizing for existing. The finish reveals the final care. It isn't makeup that hides defects. It's protection that brings out the material's truth. Gratitude tends to work like that. It doesn't falsify the story, doesn't erase the knots, doesn't paint euphoria over what still hurts. It simply seals with acknowledgement the steps already taken, and that seal protects the sensitive surfaces from daily wear. The body senses the difference when gratitude enters. Memory stops becoming a charge and becomes ground, and with ground, walking grows steadier. Underneath it all remains the steady, almost musical sound of the workshop, the handsaw going and coming, the hammer finding the nail head, the cloth removing excess glue. None of this happens without marks. The hands get used to small scrapes, clothes carry dust, the air becomes steeped in a scent that mingles effort and hope. In a family, similar signs appear, conversations that leave the voice a little hoarse, eyes that swell and then de-swell, short nights followed by mornings with a slightly cleaner clarity. Providence, which moves in the hidden, loves these discrete marks. In them, the path is recognized. Finally, when the piece finds its place, there's no need to announce victory. The home, silently, becomes more habitable. The table welcomes, the cabinet doesn't creak. The door closes with gentleness. The floor bears the steps of children and those who are aging. So too with bills aligned and affections reorganized. Nothing becomes a spectacle, but everything becomes more possible. With Joseph, the work doesn't brag, it holds. and held, it leaves room for life to flourish without fear, like a courtyard with light at the center of the house. In Nazareth, the Word chose silence as a home, and in that silence, work became a language of love. The pages of the Gospel show Joseph waking from dreams that were not escape, but guidance. Show Mary keeping in her heart what she did not yet fully understand. Show Jesus growing in stature, wisdom, and grace. There is no fanfare in these verses. There is ground. The home of the Holy Family was not spared displacements, uncertainty, everyday expenses. It was rather visited by a presence that gave meaning to matter. When tradition calls Joseph just, it is saying that his choices obeyed a plumb line higher than the day's mood, because they were aligned to God. Catholic social teaching, in speaking of the dignity of work and the centrality of the family, touches this same nerve of reality. Work does not reduce a person to function. It places them in relationship with creation, with those they love, with their own story. And the family, before it is a concept, is a table. It is care. It is the passing on of faith from one heart to another. When a household suffers under the weight of bills, it isn't only about math. It is about the body, about affection, about belonging. Therefore, justice, which appears so quietly in Joseph's craft, isn't cold legalism. It is the measure of love that protects the most vulnerable, correction that does not humiliate, the search for balance that allows everyone to live. The fathers and saints of the Church, each in their own way, recognized in Joseph a mirror of fatherhood that does not confuse itself with domination, but with silent service. That service translated into decisions that preserved the promise. The promise does not always shine. Often it ripens in the dark like a seed in good soil. It was so in Egypt. It was so on the return. It was so in the routine of Nazareth. Providence moved the pieces without bluster, but with precision. And when the time came, the road was already prepared to be walked. Under this light, a family's financial everyday life appears as a theological place, a place where God also wishes to be found. There is no holiness without matter. There is holiness that passes through matter, the receipt that ceases to be a weight and returns to being a commitment, the agreement that ceases to be defeat and returns to being justice, the memory that ceases to charge and returns to recognizing steps taken. Tradition does not romanticize poverty, nor does it absolutize wealth. It recalls that the measure of life lies in the love that organizes goods, and in the good that goods can serve. Money, under this gaze, goes back to its proper shelf. It does not define, it serves. There is a wisdom recognized in this meeting between Bible and tradition, God's patience with our processes. Jesus learned to walk before walking far. Joseph learned to obey by waking from dreams before leading the family along hard roads. Mary learned to say yes in stages, each time deeper. This divine pedagogy honors human time and therefore does not treat us like result machines. The heart breathes more freely when it perceives that fidelity matters more than spectacle, and that small, coherent, constant steps carry the weight of eternity. Before this heritage, today's household can see itself inside a great story, not at its margins. The dinner table, the bed that guards sleep, the notebook with notes, the honest tiredness at day's end, all of this can be a place of grace. The gospel doesn't ask us to flee reality. It invites us to see in reality an altar. And when tradition calls Joseph a guardian, it does not point to a distant hero. It points to a close presence that sustains without invading, guides without shouting, protects without imprisoning. It is this nearness that returns courage to simple choices and hope to bills that little by little find their measure. Under the same roof, faith and life recognize each other and, in recognizing, sustain one another. The environment slowly settles, as if the house were learning a new rhythm. The breath lengthens, the shoulders find a lower place, the jaw releases, and the body tells the heart there is safety enough to let go of vigilance. In this climate, the mind leaves the noise and opens space for meaning. The emotional memory, so often triggered by fear, begins to be re-educated by a gentler sound. There is no rush in this beginning. There is presence. Presence that allows listening. Listening that allows truth. Truth that allows care. Beloved faces draw near through remembrance and take their seats around an invisible table. Each name brings a recent story, the one who works in silence to support everyone, the one who carries in her chest the sum of pressures and hopes, the little one who watches the adults trying to understand the world, the elder who preserves the home with the patience of someone who has already crossed similar nights. The bills also present themselves without masks, papers that do not swallow dignity, deadlines that ask for a way, agreements that guard justice. Everything breathes in the same space, as if the workshop of Nazareth were embracing all at once people and papers, affections and numbers. The heart then perceives the delicate join between spirituality and body. As air moves in and out with a little more cadence, the nervous system turns off alarms and returns voice to the parts of the mind that plan with serenity. What was a total threat returns to being a set of concrete situations. The experience arises that life, despite the weight, isn't collapsing. It is asking for support. That support sounds like prayer, not as escape, but as consent to the care of the God who works in hidden places. Consent that doesn't infantilize maturity, it simply orients it. The voice then finds words, ancient and ever new. The tone doesn't rise, doesn't demand, doesn't dramatize. It simply places itself before God with what is. Prayer as matter offered, word as wood that accepts the plumb line, and the prayer is born whole, like this. St. Joseph, foster father of Jesus and guardian of the Holy Family, before God the names of this household and the needs of this home are presented. Thanks be given for the bread already received, for the protection already experienced, for the discreet paths along which providence has passed. Light is asked for what is still lacking, prudence for what needs measure, courage for the adjustments that require truth. Teach Joseph your silence that trusts, your obedience that strengthens, your work that sanctifies. Support relationships so that fear does not speak louder than love. Open just doors and close shortcuts that wound dignity. May Providence guide us with prudence, charity, and peace. Amen. After the plea, silence lingers a few moments more. It isn't absence, it is care. The body registers this care as stabilization. The chest stops tightening, the stomach slows, the skin regains temperature. The mind recognizes that prayer didn't remove anyone from reality. It simply put reality back into its possible size. The family present in the name still exists. The bills still ask for a way. And between one and the other, a trust rises that allows the day to be crossed without getting lost inside. Joseph's bench remains before the inner eyes. The plumb line descends gently and points direction. Charity, like glue, supports joints that were fragile. Patience, like sandpaper, removes old splinters. None of this changes photographs from one day to the next. It changes how the house leans on itself while choices ripen. And as they ripen, the workshop keeps a simple secret. When prayer finds time and place, the everyday learns to breathe and, breathing, starts seeing opportunities that fear hid. The practice is recorded as a habit of the soul, without banners, brief moments of silence that recall the essential, a language of gratitude. Throughout the week, Providence finds passage through small choices that fit the home's real rhythm. It isn't a performance, but a way of inhabiting the days. The mind recognizes these markers as reference points, and in recognizing them, reduces the tired vigilance that made everything seem urgent. The body follows, the breath regains cadence, sleep recovers, conversation becomes possible without every phrase sounding like a sentence. In such environments, hope ceases to be an idea and becomes an atmosphere. In many homes, a symbolic gesture gains quiet life. A small drawer, a simple box, or a modest folder begins to keep in one place intentions, papers with deadlines, reminders of important dates. It receives the name St. Joseph's, not as an amulet, but as a memory of care. Seeing gathered what weighs heavy prevents fear from scattering phantoms through every room. The eye can see the whole, the mind knows where to find what it needs, and the heart perceives there is sequence, that nothing depends on bursts of willpower, but on constancy that fits in the palm of the hand. Near sunrise, when the day is still choosing its color, the first task usually carries a special meaning. It is born with a name within, like someone offering today's effort for the one who depends on that effort. The effect is subtle and concrete. Motivation ceases to be only external pressure and finds its root in belonging. Emotional neuroscience recognizes, in these bonds of meaning, a fuel for perseverance. Faith recognizes in the same gesture a bridge by which grace crosses the everyday without fanfare. There are also those who mark time with an old rhythm, 9 days, 9 minutes, like someone allowing the plea to ripen without anxiety. This calm marking teaches that process matters more than impulse, and that the soul, when respected in its tempo, gathers more lasting fruit. On Wednesdays, some hearts find in St. Joseph's Rosary a midweek crossing. Bills and names pass through memory, and at the end, the home regains that silence which is not distance, it is protection. That protects the heart from hardening, a plea that returns direction when the hours scatter. Joseph remains a companion on the road, discreet, steady, attentive, and the home, touched by this companionship, regains that note of peace that doesn't depend on perfect circumstances. Peace that doesn't cancel the struggle, but makes it possible. Throughout the week, Providence finds passage through small choices that fit the home's real rhythm. It isn't a performance, but a way of inhabiting the days. The mind recognizes these markers as reference points and, in recognizing them, reduces the tired vigilance that made everything seem urgent. The body follows. The breath regains cadence. Sleep recovers. Conversation becomes possible without every phrase sounding like a sentence. In such environments, hope ceases to be an idea and becomes an atmosphere. In many homes, a symbolic gesture gains quiet life. A small drawer, a simple box, or a modest folder begins to keep, in one place, intentions, papers with deadlines, reminders of important dates. It receives the name St.Joseph's, not as an amulet, but as a memory of care. Seeing gathered what weighs heavy prevents fear from scattering phantoms through every room. The eye can see the whole. The mind knows where to find what it needs, and the heart perceives there is sequence, that nothing depends on bursts of willpower, but on constancy that fits in the palm of the hand. Near sunrise, when the day is still choosing its color, the first task usually carries a special meaning. It is born with a name within, like someone offering today's effort for the one who depends on that effort. The effect is subtle and concrete. Motivation ceases to be only external pressure and finds its root in belonging. Emotional neuroscience recognizes, in these bonds of meaning, a fuel for perseverance. Faith recognizes in the same gesture a bridge by which grace crosses the everyday without fanfare. There are also those who mark time with an old rhythm, 9 days, 9 minutes, like someone allowing the plea to ripen without anxiety. This calm marking teaches that process matters more than impulse, and that the soul, when respected in its tempo, gathers more lasting fruit. On Wednesdays, some hearts find in St. Joseph's Rosary a midweek crossing. Bills and names pass through memory, and at the end the home regains that silence which is not distance, it is protection.